Welcome to Season 6, Episode 237 of School Librarians United. I'm your host, Amy Herman. This podcast is dedicated to the issues and challenges school librarians face every day. As a school librarian starting my 17th year, I knew I wanted a podcast which addressed the nuts and bolts of running a successful library program. I don't claim to have the answers, but I hope that this is a platform to share resources and exchange ideas. Now is a perfect time to mention that all the ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast by myself, my interview guests, and listeners who reach out to the podcast are our own and do not reflect those of our school districts. When incorporating research, I always make sure to cite my sources. So whether you are a novice or a veteran school librarian, this podcast is something for you. I'd like to extend a very special welcome this week to everyone heading back to school, especially listeners Verity in the UK, Brandy in California, Andrea in Illinois, Amanda in Louisiana, Marlana in Missouri, Steve in New Jersey, Lori in Oregon, and Wendy in Texas. I welcome you and all listeners to reach out with your feedback and episode suggestions. You can reach me either on Facebook, on Twitter, my handle is @LMS_United, or the email address schoollibrariansunited@gmail.com. If you include your mailing address, I'll be sure to send you a podcast sticker. Be sure to listen to episode 224. I announce a new sponsorship with Literati Book Fairs. And now is a chance to hear from Kathi, a Literati Book Fair veteran. Kathi Edwards, welcome back to the podcast.
It's great to be back.
Friends, I am so excited. It has been 2 years to the date that Kathi and I first recorded an episode 139, Role as Tech Director. Kathi, it's been a while, but your podcast episode just keeps on getting downloads because people have found inspiration in what you shared 2 years ago.
It's crazy to hear that. I can't believe it.
Can I ask, are you still very much a tech director in your school?
Oh, yes, 100%. I think that's all I've done since we've started back. I finally get to do library stuff tomorrow.
I understand. We wear many hats.
We do.
Friends, Kathi is a Literati Book Fair veteran. And would you just tell listeners what is on your calendar this year? And give us a little idea, like your literati journey, where did that start?
Goodness, my literati journey started in, I guess it would be spring of 2022. Yes, because last school year was 22-23. So spring of 22, they reached out to me and asked if I'd be interested in trying literati. And I said, sure. And so I went ahead and scheduled book fairs out for fall of 2022 and February of 2023. And they were amazing. And by the time I was wrapping up my February book fair, we were already booking for fall of 23 and winter of 24. And I got off the phone in July for my pre-book fair phone call with my consultant. And we've already booked my fall of 24 and my winter of 25 book fairs. I'm already on their calendar and ready to go.
Wow. I mean, you have 4 more book fairs lined up, already on the calendar. And I'm guessing that you were very particular about the dates and the weeks that you got. Would you explain to listeners what motivated you and why you were so particular about making sure to get these dates on Literati's calendar?
My Literati book fairs have been such a success with students and parents, and even with my teachers. We've had adult books provided at these book fairs, and they have been loving it. And so we do a back to school night with parents in like August, September, and we do a science night in every February. So I go ahead and schedule book fairs for those 2 weeks so that we have a guaranteed evening shopping experience for our families. And those days they're long days, but they're fun, and they definitely bring in the money. You see lots of book joy. It's a lot of fun.
Well, and I've had evening events for book fairs, and that is something very fun about seeing the family coming in and going, okay, you can go pick out your books, and the parents really this is money that they can feel good about spending on their kids. Kathi Edwards, thank you so much for joining us. I hope you'll come back and share a little more of your literati expertise in the next coming episodes.
I'd be happy to.
Thanks so much, Kathi.
You're welcome.
I'm so grateful to Literati for their sponsorship of the podcast and their very generous offer. Librarians who book their very first Literati Book Fair for this upcoming school year and mention the code UNITED will receive a $500 gift card from Titlewave. As always, there's a link in today's show notes. And now a word from Capstone. Capstone is an innovative publisher and education technology provider of children's content for school libraries, classrooms, and at-home learning. Home of the award-winning PebbleGo research database, Capstone has a passion for creating inspired learning and intellectual curiosity in children, and I'm so excited to be working with them. I'm also grateful to Capstone for their continued commitment to support the podcast in Season 6. They're offering listeners of School Librarians United a very special discount. Visit shop.capstonepub.com and use the code UNITED to get $20 off an order of $100 or more for both print and Capstone interactive ebooks. That's code UNITED for $20 off an order of $100 or more for both print and ebooks on shop.capstonepub.com. And now for our episode, Redefining Research, and my conversation with Lisa Cheby. Lisa Cheby, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me here. I'm so excited.
Friends, I'm so excited to be sharing this conversation with Lisa. You bring a lot of unique perspective, Lisa, especially because I haven't met too many school librarians who have found their way to the library by way of Hollywood.
Well, there was the English teacher gap in between. But yes, I moved out to Los Angeles originally to be a film and video editor. When I sort of lost motivation to seek those jobs, I figured I could fall back and be a substitute teacher. But LAUSD was not hiring substitutes, but they were hiring teachers. And 3 months later, there I was on an emergency credential in East Los Angeles, teaching English. And then 10 years later, kind of by an equally unplanned event, I took time off to get a degree in creative writing. When I came back, I landed a half-time English teacher, half-time librarian position. And that opened up the door to, and again, I had to get the emergency credential for the Library Media Services credential. And so once I had that, I was able to apply for teacher librarian jobs, and I got one. And became a full-time teacher librarian.
Fantastic. But let listeners know, where do you work now? Because I don't think you're in the school library presently.
No, I'm just completed my first year as the education librarian at California State University, Northridge, one of our public universities here in Los Angeles. And so I service future teachers of Los Angeles or the U.S. or wherever they end up, but I work specifically with the students who are in our, it's mostly master's programs and the credential programs. And we do have a EDD program in our Education Leadership Policy Studies department. So I am now their librarian. And also I'm tasked with doing outreach for educators throughout Los Angeles. So I'm still very much in the library world. I still am on the email list with all the school librarians. I did some mentoring for somebody who's finishing her credential last term, and I work with the California School Library Association as their vice president of government relations. So very active and still promoting school libraries here in California.
Wonderful. So I have to ask, though, you're primarily tasked with working with the up-and-coming future teachers.
Yes.
Is this an opportunity to also advocate for the importance of having school librarians and working with the school librarians in their buildings? Because I know all too often, when I was getting my teaching certificate, many decades ago, there was zero mention of the value of working collaboratively with a school librarian. So I would hope to think that this is an opportunity that you have to reach that audience.
I hope so. I mean, I'm still very new and I feel like, like I said, I started last July, and I feel like I'm just getting started now, though. Like that first year was just learning kind of the landscape of academia, kind of like moving to a new city, and now I feel like I'm actually able to start making, plans and sort of having an agenda. What do I want to do in this position? I definitely have ideas around that. It's just a matter of building those relationships and collaborations. Obviously working with the teachers, but we also have the Educational Leadership and Policy Studies program, which are the administrative credentials. And there's been several studies around how teacher librarians, administrators have no training, no mention at all of what to do with their school library and school librarians. I have to say I'm a little bit of a advocacy geek, I guess. Like I really like to think about the larger picture and how we can find those inroads to really, and particularly California. I don't know the situation and where you are or where our listeners are out there, but California is 51st in teacher librarian to student ratio. Like it's terrible. We have like maybe, I want to say it's around 7,000. That's a conservative. It might be, less 7,000 students per teacher librarian. So the fact is, part of the answer, what I'm trying to get at is, many of the teachers are going to schools where there are not teacher librarians. There's no teacher librarian to work with them. But this has been a focus. Some of the events I had, the first year were bringing in organizations like Copyright and Creativity, which is an organization I work with, and they have great resources on including copyright education and courses, and they work a lot with teacher librarians because it fits naturally with our standards. And in California, we have the K-12 Online Content Project, which are databases the state library provides for libraries. So I have these people as guest speakers to, really bring those resources to educators and to make our students and our professors aware of these things because they don't know about that either. So it's in there. It's very embedded in the agenda.
Well, and friends, I will be sure to include a link to Copyright and Creativity in our show notes. It is a fantastic resource. I know that you can get certified in as a trainer to do this. I have a friend who does that, and they offer fantastic resources, which are always free and accessible to school librarians and educators. So we'll encourage everybody to take a look at it on their own. I'm always fascinated by the journey that guests take in generating the expertise that they then bring to the podcast. Would you give listeners an idea of how you first became interested in redefining research?
I would actually say my interest started when I had that half-time librarian position. That position was a one-semester position. So after that, I got displaced, and I ended up teaching 8th grade English at a middle school, my one and only semester in middle school. Like you, Amy, I am very grounded in high school. But I really in the freedom I had though in the 8th grade curriculum for students to write more student-directed projects versus this content that I was beholden to as a high school teacher was very freeing, and so I could actually take time to teach them just how to do research. It didn't have to be like this big paper. And I think that was a real breakthrough for me. And shortly after that, I did get a full-time teacher librarian position at a high school. And so I think that's when I really wanted to start to think about how we teach research. Although I should go back to, as an English teacher, I think one of the early lessons I learned was assigning students a research question for a paper. Like that's it's torture for them because they're writing about something they don't care about. It's torture for me because I have to now read 30 versions of passionless writing and bad writing in many ways. And so that's something I was always working on as a teacher. I taught a lot of intervention classes when I was an English teacher, and one of the resources I found really useful was the Center for Media Literacy. They have a whole sort of media literacy lesson template, and so I incorporated a lot of that, and we can put that link also in the resources. I think I already have it in there, but they have a whole framework for analyzing media, which, that was probably 10, 15 years ago. So I think I was always sort of interested in really giving students this idea of empowering them to think critically more than let's write a research paper. So when I became a teacher librarian, I really, a lot of teachers would come to you and they'd be like, "Can you teach my students MLA?" like it's a thing that you teach and then you just do. Like, I was like, well, why don't we teach them how to identify the different parts and really understand different sources? And of course, they want it done in like 20 minutes. And so I think, I started marketing myself as like, let's rethink what research is. And also, I talked to, teachers about let's work on research. We need to get students doing in research. And they immediately think I have to do this, 10-page research paper with citations and all of that. So I really wanted to come up with think about teaching research as a set of skills rather than an end paper. Because I can't grade all the papers. They don't want to grade the papers. And it's really a way of thinking that we need to be teaching.
Lisa, I am so glad that you included a copy of your Knowledge Quest article, Search Strategy Instruction, Shifting from Baby Bird Syndrome to Curious Cat Critical Thinking. It was a very fun read, but could you, let's first of all talk about the shift that you're talking about, and then I would like to know more about the role that librarians play in both supporting the students and supporting the teachers. So once I got into this article, I was like, I had to read the whole thing. So I appreciate you including it. But definitely give us an idea of the baby bird syndrome to curious cat critical thinking.
So a friend of mine who I went through, we both became teachers at the same time through that Teachers Fellows program where they were recruiting people from other professions to fill the teacher shortage. And we also became hiking buddies. But she would talk about the students like they it's like a baby bird. They just want you to come drop the answer. You just imagine the birds and they just want to be fed the answer. What's the answer? But how do we get them to think and be like, there is no answer. You're learning to think. What did you learn? And what are your thoughts about it? How do you connect this, make meaning of it? How does it make you see the world differently, understand things better, So I always loved that image that she came up with, the baby birds. And I would think of that often, like when I'm standing in class frustrated, I'm just like, I'd get that image. It's a little amusing to me. And maybe like, why is she laughing to herself? That weird librarian or teacher, whatever. So, and then when I became a librarian, I started studying the guided inquiry process. And I never know how to say her name properly. Kolthau, I think it is. Carol Kolthau. We also have the article linked in the resources, I'm pretty sure. She's the one who first started really writing about research as a set of skills, as a process, not a product, which is kind of where I came up with the defining research thing and model that. But she also talks about the emotional component of research. It's not just like going and finding an answer, but there's a learning happening. There's confusion, there's uncertainty, there's frustration. And all of that is part of the research process and part of learning. If we're not tapping into student emotions and allowing them to experience those things, and those things take time, that cannot happen in a 30-minute library session.
I think it's important that you attach emotions to this process, because if you're doing it right, the students become invested in this process. If they don't have any sort of interest in the process, they're not going to give you the kind of focus that really is required to make this meaningful. In the presentation which you gave, and I love the a resource that you provided in our show notes, friends. Be sure to save some time for that deep dive. But there are feelings attached to the different stages of information seeking, and I can so readily identify with this at any stage of my academic past. But you've got anxiety, uncertainty, optimism, frustration, confusion, optimism, increased interest. I love that part, increased interest, because the kids, at some point, you can sort of see it when they realize now they want to know. Confidence and relief, increased interest, again, confidence, again, satisfaction or disappointment, all of these range of emotions that should be sort of tapped when our students tackle something with the kind of attention that they should be putting into something that is going to command this much bandwidth of theirs for an extended research assignment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, when Kulthau was developing this, we didn't have terms like social emotional learning, but really that's what she was getting at, was allowing space for that kind of learning. And again, that's a skill, another area of study of mine personally is yoga. But, I often, and interestingly, the yoga talks about like research and evidence and taking time to work through emotions and frustrations to gain that clarity. And so in teaching students the research process, we're also teaching them life skills on how to deal with challenge, uncertainty, frustration, and push through to completion to get something done. And also that it's okay if you're feeling like, I don't know what I'm doing right now, and I lost my question. I also like that this process it's not linear. It's not like you complete one step and go on, but it's a constant, choice of engagement. And so that was the shift, I think that I really wanted to make in how teachers thought about coming to the library for research. Now, my challenge was, how do I get the time to do this? And what are some tools that I can use to do that? So the other two questions were the role in supporting our teachers and supporting students. I'm going to talk about teachers first and then students. Because I don't get access to the students if I can't get the teachers to bring them in. Obviously there's one-on-one access, but if we really want to be embedding this type of instruction in the curriculum for as many students as possible, I need the teachers to bring their students to the library for library sessions. So a lot of times, and I did a whole other presentation, which I can also share with you on collaboration. And I like to think of it, when I'm bringing people in as kind of a first date, and we're going to see if we're going to be a good match, me and the teacher, because I'm sure we've all taught those lessons where we're like, I want you to teach the students, here's the research assignment, and you come in and you show them all these library resources, and then the students go to Google, and not that I have anything against Google, we need to be teaching that, but the students go to Google and choose the first article, and the teacher's like, yeah, that's fine. Like, I just spent, an hour designing a lesson for your class, an hour teaching a lesson to your class, and now you're going to ignore everything that I said. So to me, that's like, if they come back, of course, they can have a second date, but, I'm not going to pursue that. I'm going to pursue the teachers who really want to work with me and really see the value in this. And I was lucky to find that. And so in developing that, I was able to work with teachers and saying things like, every student should have their own research question. Many teachers find that very scary because they're like, how can I be the expert and read the paper and grade that if everybody has a different topic that I did not choose for them? And so, I would provide support and guide them through, okay, well, this is really what we're going to be going through and evaluating. And I think there's a question later about the low stakes, high engagement. And that's kind of around, what are we really assessing when we're assessing research and talking about that? So supporting teachers through that, designing the lessons, and really co-teaching with them. Which includes some grading responsibilities. Ultimately, it's up to them to grade it, but I will do some preliminary, this is what a good assignment should be. And also creating things. So the Knowledge Quest article was one aspect, that search strategy aspect, that I would create these small assignments that were very quick to assess and something that I could assist the teacher with. So I think supporting the teachers in that way with assessment, lesson design, planning.
Could you give us an example of something that you would suggest that would be something that would support the teacher in, like you just said, something that's short and not as time-consuming as perhaps a longer part of the rubric? I'm just thinking about a rubric, and if you put together, what is something that you might suggest to be a time saver for the teacher?
Well, the final assignment in the presentation that I shared with you is actually each student does a PowerPoint. So there's not an actual paper at the end of it, but it's a very deep level research assignment, and it includes a lot of reflection. I've also modified parts of this assignment for something for some of our special ed teachers who were always willing to come in and let me do experiments on lessons and things. It was great. They were very... special ed departments are so collaborative, and they're so happy when other people want to work with them and really add some rigor to their curriculum with them, but also, willing to accommodate and use their expertise on how to accommodate for their students. We would create templates, and they might have students could choose a short topic. It would just be much shorter, but simply having a 1-paragraph response summary of your research with some citations, that's research. It does not have to be a 5-page paper. I don't need, a fancy thesis. But if the students could write and reflect on what they learn about a specific topic in their class, then we could do that. So there was one, I can't remember exactly. I think they were reading something about spies. They were reading some fiction and nonfiction about spies. So they each were assigned an agency or some topic around that in our U.S. government, like the FBI, CIA, that they had to research and present on. So, we just used a simple template. I think it was maybe about a 2-3 day lesson, and that was it. But it was research, and they got to ask, they had to develop their own questions about the topic, and then share that with the class, I think, in a PowerPoint presentation. So something like that. Hopefully that helps.
And I noticed that you did include, in your presentation, you included a student example. And in this case, it included a great deal of reflection as part of the assessment. And in this case, we're going to talk about this, but this question formulation technique, which you also have. And I'd love to make sure that we talk about that. You mentioned in one of your resources, is it possible to teach curiosity? And, as somebody who is self-described as having an infinite capacity for curiosity, and this is why I'm never going to get a PhD, because I'm so scattered and I love learning about everything. I have always assumed that my students would also share this characteristic trait, and that just isn't the case. So, how is it that we can, as the school librarian in the equation, help generate that sense of curiosity in our students?
I think this is one of the things I most love about being a librarian. And when I had that little taste of it in that half-time librarian position, it's that's what I want to do, because I can now interact with the students. I'm a teacher, and my best collaborators always made sure that the students understood I am a teacher. But also, my relationship with them as far as grading is not the same. And I think in designing this, I really emphasize in the library that I think some of it is just creating, as you've talked about with many of your other guests, I think at times, so I don't want to go into it too much, but how do we create a welcoming library space, right? So, but that's not today's topic necessarily, but I think that's the underlying foundation, like creating a space that's welcoming, always making sure the classes come to the library versus me going to them. So, which I think automatically instills, like, you're there surrounded by the books. And I think that instills curiosity, encouraging students that they can choose whatever topic they want and guiding them through that. But so I think, the primary things, and this is where the question formulation technique is something I discovered, because how do we do this? And somehow I don't remember exactly where I stumbled across the question formulation technique, but I did. I'm going to just Google like teaching how to ask questions because students had trouble coming up with questions, but some of it was also that they're never allowed to do that. They're kind of taught in education that, again, that baby bird image that like there's a right answer and they want to be fed it because it's not necessarily like an answer that they want, but they know that's what the teacher wants or the AP College Board has decided was something worthy that they should investigate or whatever it is, the textbook. And so allowing them so that you do have to invite them and teach them to come in and ask their own questions.
I am so curious because your presentation, Redefining Research, you reference a link in salon.com, an article by Ian Leslie titled, Google Makes Us All Dumber. Also a very fascinating read, but that came out in 2014. And in 2023, now that AI is starting to become very mainstream and becoming a popular place, a go-to place for students to find those answers, I feel like this conversation about redefining research is more important than ever.
I agree. And I'm glad you brought in AI because that's kind of the next thing that I am kind of bringing this idea to. And again, it goes back to, whether it's AI or Google, or, Gale opposing viewpoints, we need to teach students to think critically. And so in bringing them in, two things that I always, were almost non-negotiable for me as much as possible, but was when students are asked to do research, they must use their own question. Preferably their own topic, but sometimes there's something content-wise that they have to research, and so we want to connect it, within the discipline. But even within that, they need to have their own question. They need to find that point of curiosity. So in the Leslie article, one of the things that struck me was, he talked about how, like, when you type in, and we see this everywhere now, that predictive text, and how that stops our brain from having to ask the question. And so when I would talk to my students, it's just like, if I'm a pitcher on the baseball team, but then we suddenly have a automatic pitching machine and I don't have to do it all the time, obviously my muscles will atrophy and I will not have the same skill and strength. And it's the same way with our brain. Dr. Susan Norton was one of my best collaborators at the last school I worked at. She was an English teacher, and we really built this 10-week lesson. And one of the things she allowed me to do was spend 2 class sessions on questioning. 2 class sessions. But it's really foundational for these students. And she understood how this and it was with 9th graders, how this 9th grade unit could be a building block for students to do research by 12th grade and then off to college. And so the question formulation technique, is really just about having students ask questions, and you do this whole like set the timer thing, and they give great trainings. And I did see them present at one of the Q conferences one year directly, and it's just a fantastic. It seems so simple, but we really don't allow students to sit in curiosity and uncertainty and really voice all their questions, right or wrong. And then you go back and you have to like revise the questions. And then that leads into that search strategy, which is the Knowledge Quest article, and building those strategies. And all through this, you're building curiosity, you're allowing for that frustration and all those other things. With AI, it's going to be the same thing. It's a tool. And we have to teach students what it is and what it isn't. and how to use it ethically and wisely. And there's a lot of great AI out there that can be very useful in research. I've been testing it out with my own research that I'm doing as faculty now, and it's fascinating. But we have to allow the students to use that, but ultimately, also teach them how to think critically about whatever it is that they're using. So we can panic about AI, but the real thing is we need more school libraries to teach students how to really engage in inquiry.
I'm really grateful that you included the video tutorials on how to use the question formulation technique for both teachers and students, because this, in theory, I understood this, but until I saw it demonstrated watching this video, it really did spell out exactly how you could do this in the classroom, or ideally in your library or learning commons, because it does put that responsibility on the students to go through the motions of considering a topic from all those different angles and generating interest in which direction they were going to take this particular research opportunity. So I love that you included that in there, because this Right Question Institute, and I take it that's what you learned about at Q, can you go into a little more detail about how you have been able to introduce this with your teachers? Because, oftentimes teachers just like to do things the way they've always done things.
It depends on the class and how I use it differently. But, the idea of guiding students to create their own research question, and some teachers come in with a way that they want to do this, and then I'm able to adapt it. And so in the question formulation technique, you start with some kind of prompt. Often it's more visual or auditory than written. And that can work if we're all doing a similar topic, or sometimes, like with Dr. Norton, we would do the first lesson, we would go through the process with a shared topic, and then they would do their own topic. So, often use like a short little 1-2 minute news clip or podcast thing or something. We always choose something different, usually something connected to current events that the students would be able to relate to and would be interested in. And then when they get to their topic, sometimes it would be in groups, but we would often go to Gale Opposing Viewpoints, and we would have, or any database that kind of has those browse topics lists, and we would have them browse topics, choose one they were interested in, form groups, and they would go through that process again. Other teachers might not want to take that much time for that, but I could always, maybe they have their own list of topics. Like I worked with one of the U.S. history and government teachers, and they would have an extensive list of topics in U.S. history, and the students could choose any of those. So often I would have them go to a sort of encyclopedia source, one of those first reference sources, read a little bit about something they wanted to know more about, and then we would go through the process there, creating questions, and I would set the timer, and they would have to, handwrite their questions, go back, revise them, identify open, close questions, and so on. But then we would continue this process throughout. I would remind them, after that first round of research, is your question still good? Do you have new questions? Where are we going? So it becomes a way of thinking and processing it. So I wasn't super, I don't think, the Right Question Institute would bring me in as a model of implementing the formula. But there was a lot of it that really informed how I would teach that in different ways.
And can I just say, as somebody who I'm relatively new to my building, and my teachers are more than happy to give me 10 or 15 minutes. Every once in a while, I kind of get on a roll, and I look at them and I say, okay. And they're like, no, you just keep on going. Honestly, sometimes you have to take whatever invitation we have to work with our teachers and trust that as they start to gain more confidence in our ability to sort of take the reins and the steering wheel and drive some of this process and be a partner in learning. Because I think all too often teachers are so comfortable in what they know and can control, that when you bring in, another variable, like a librarian, you do have to allow for that trust to be built. And it does not happen overnight. And our best way to make these inroads is to support somebody who is, and I have found, the ones who are brand new, because they are more than, they have not, that fixed mindset isn't there yet. And they're like, yeah, sure, come on in and work with my kids. And all of a sudden they're talking to their team at their next PLN and making sure that they say, oh, yeah, I worked with Amy. And it's like, oh, hey, all of a sudden you find yourself with more opportunities. But you have to take some of those baby steps. Just as somebody who is still making those inroads every single year, you have mentioned in some of the resources you've so generously shared that, this, every once in a while I see this comment come up again, high engagement, low stakes. And I want you to spell that out to listeners. When you talk about a process which is high engagement and low stakes, what exactly are you talking about?
I'm talking about activities like the question formulation technique, right? What's your job? Your job right now is for the next 5 minutes with your group to ask questions until the timer goes off. That's it. That's it. That's low stakes. All that you have to do is ask questions. I'm not going to grade the questions. There's no right or wrong question. And then it might have to be around the topic, right? So, if it's a history class, if it's world history, U.S. history, you have to ask questions about that. We somehow connect to U.S. history, but that's all you have to do. And sometimes, there's often a lag, if you're doing a series of lessons of students getting it, but, or like with the search strategy, you need to write down your question, identify your keywords, and fill in the concept chart. The concept chart could be all wrong, but did you fill it in? And if it's all wrong, I'm going to give you suggestions. So the idea in the concept chart is you have your different columns, and concepts and synonyms, all go in like one row or one column. And sometimes everything's all over. And so did you do it? Great. Did you do it where it's going to be useful for research? Well, I'm going to give you suggestions. Go back and redo it. You submit it. You get the points. So it's high engagement. You just have to do it. Low stakes. You don't have to do it right the first time. And then we're going to put in queries and just note how many results we got. That's it. You don't have to read the articles. You don't have to analyze it. But can you do it? And then put in a new query and tell me how it changed. That's it. But these are fundamental skills to research, to getting students through that fear and confusion and chaos that we know they will expect in research, and empowering them that they can make choices and that there's no right or wrong. It's a messy process, and that's okay.
Yeah, no, I'm hoping you'll explain, because something that I found when I was looking through your resources is something called a found poem. And can you explain how this is part of this process of rethinking research?
First of all, I'm a poet, so anytime I can work in poetry into anything, I do it. And I actually used the found poem when I was an English teacher teaching Elie Wiesel's Night. There was one chapter where we would always do a found poem from that particular chapter, because it's a very emotional chapter, and it allows students to actually, I don't think it was one chapter, it was the whole book, but students would pick a theme and they would pull out found lines and make a poem. And it allows them to really connect to the emotion of it. Again, it's low stakes, because in a found poem, you're using words from the text. You don't have to make it up. And you put it in order and make it look like a poem. And, who's to say what's a poem and what's not in the end? But in doing that, students were learning to pull out language that resonates with them. And essentially, isn't that what we want them to do when they write a paper? And, if they're writing a paragraph about a theme in a book and they need evidence, they're pulling out the language that resonates, that shows that theme, that emotion. So that was always a precursor that I used as an English teacher for, a more traditional literary analysis type of paper. in this, again, students were learning all these new skills. They were like using these databases that they never heard of. There was all this other language, queries and concept charts. And, the students were like, but they had a topic that originally they were interested in. So putting in the found poem rather than summarizing and analyzing one of the articles that they read and found allowed them to reconnect to the emotional content of their question and do something creative. Now, some students hated the found poem. Some students loved it, like any other part of the research process, and that was one of the questions in the final project. Like, what part did you like the most and what part did you like the least or struggled with the most? And it was just always like kind of like a little fun reprieve in the middle of it. And then the students would all, share their poems as part of their presentation. So.
Well, and I like, that embedded in this case, the student's final assessment is the reflection about the topic and reflection about the process. And this to me is that's metacognition, right? It's like, and we're going back to all the pedagogy that starts to swirl in my head. But can you sort of break down why, in your opinion, this is a very valuable step in reimagining the research process?
Well, the research process, again, I think it's often taught in a way that I'm going to research and then be an expert on this topic. But that rarely happens. I mean, even, like I said, even now I'm, at a university and I'm having to do my own research. And research really just leads to more questions. The more, academic articles I read, nobody's like, that's it. They're like, now here's what we need to do next. This raised all these other questions that we didn't have before. We have this little tiny slice of certainty or clarity, but it's, so I wanted that for the students. And again, the intent of that particular unit that's in that presentation is for students to learn the research process, the skills. So, coming to some sort of synthesis on the article was not the goal. So we came up with those two reflections. What did you learn about content? And in that reflection, there are things like, if I were to continue researching this topic, here's what I would want to know. Or here is the direction I would want to go in. So this idea of, did you learn something? And if you learned something, that should raise more questions. And then here's what I learned about the process. So what I was being taught, we were not teaching content. They chose the content they wanted to read and research. We were teaching research skills and a process. And what did you learn about that? And what do you need more help in? What do you feel confident in? How will you use this in the future? So I think, that goes back to the low stakes, high engagement. If you engaged in each part of the unit and each activity we did in class, you will have your full presentation and hopefully you will have learned something new.
And along those same lines, Lisa, I think one of the reasons why I really am grateful for this conversation is it is very meta in such that, you and I are scratching the surface of this content, but by providing listeners with the show notes, and this is an inquiry process which we are just very scratching the surface of this in providing the resources. The listeners who are tuning in, if this is something that they want to pursue, because we are creating more questions, and I'm sure that there are listeners going, wait, I have questions. The nice thing is that you have generously provided some great resources for listeners who want to then pursue their own inquiry into reimagining the research that happens in their spaces with their classes and their students. So I do appreciate that on so many levels, this is creating something of an opportunity for our listeners to do that, the further inquiry themselves, if this is something that they should happen to find interesting. And I know that I went through a couple rabbit holes in preparing for this conversation, but many of those resources, which, tangentially for me, I'm already thinking about the teachers I want to share these with, and I'm still in summer mode. But when I looked at some of the resources, for example, one of them I know I've heard about, but I've completely forgotten about it, was the Newseum. It is this fantastic link to the Newseum. And friends, I know I've heard about this, but all of a sudden I could think of all the teachers I wanted to share this with. And, but again, that's one of the reasons why we include these resources in the show notes, because ultimately how the listeners use the conversation is up to them.
Yeah. I really love the Newseum. I use that a lot. Actually, I don't think I use that in the unit that is in the presentation. From that unit, which was kind of the 9th grade unit, once we had a few classes go through that, I and some of the other English teachers at the school were building other units. So ideally, the students would come in every year and do a different version of that unit more and more independently. That's, scaffolding. That's what we do as teachers. And and it would always be different topics or maybe assignments, but that process would be repeated over and over. And one of the things that we added in was more about lateral reading. And the Newseum has some great things because we talk about sources. We say source, but there's 3 or 4 different things we might mean by a source. And they have some great lessons and graphics talking about that. And that's something that students really, really struggle with, is identifying and talking about sources in a way that's clear for them to communicate their thoughts.
I do appreciate anytime teacher resources break it down. In this case, it's by grades 3 through 5, upper elementary, grades 6 through 8, which would be a solid middle school search, and then grades 9 through 12 for a secondary, sort of a high school experience. But you've also got the college breakdown as well as the educators, and these are great resources. But again, it's something that many educators would find valuable because of it's custom for their teaching experiences. Lisa, I'm so grateful you were able to join us today. In Redefining Research, where is this going to take you moving forward? Because I know listeners would be interested to know more about it.
One of the reasons I moved up to the university level from high school is because I did want to pursue studying this more systematically and its effect and impact on students, as well as developing a model that can be used by teacher librarians and teachers wherever they're interested in looking at research in this way, and kind of take some of the theories and make it into something easily implementable in any school library and any classroom. So definitely going to continue working on this and share that with the community.
I really appreciate it. Would you let us know how we can follow you on social media and include you in our PLN?
Yes, I am on Twitter at Librarian Chibi, and I am on Instagram at Librarian_Chibi, and we can put those links in the show notes. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lisa. I really appreciate you joining us today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of our summer and have a great school year.
You too. Thank you so much for having me on and letting me share and talk about this.
As with all episodes which are being recorded and shared out over the summer months, I am grateful to Lisa and to all my guests whose generosity of their time and talents have made these episodes possible. If you found this episode helpful, please share it out with your team, your PLN, and on social media. Be sure to follow on your favorite podcatcher so you'll never miss an episode. And if you really like listening today, consider leaving some fan mail to Lisa and adding her to your virtual PLN. One last friendly reminder, friends, use the code UNITED to take advantage of Capstone's generous $20 discount off an order of $100 or more, and schedule your first Literati Book Fair to receive $500 Titlewave gift card. As always, there's a link in the show notes. As we are enjoying the last weeks of summer, I am busy scheduling episodes and recordings, and the topic of our next episode has yet to be finalized, but I can guarantee it will be 100% by school librarians and for school librarians. I hope you will tune in.